Today we're here with an Australian radio icon, the host of 2GB's top-rated breakfast show, Ben Fordham. Thank you for coming on.
Hey Sam, how are you, mate? I've had some ding-dong battles with Albo. He falsely accused me of doing something. I was like, excuse me, Prime Minister, excuse me. I conducted an investigation into a bloke who was trying to organise for a hitman to kill someone.
I heard when you were first offered the morning show, you said no.
And Pete called and he said, Ben, Peter Overton. I said, oh, hi Pete, how are you? He goes, boy, that was a good bulletin.
You're up at 3:15 a.m?
But in the morning, people wake up and they just want to know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And it's my job to let them know. A little girl called Cleo was missing in Western Australia and she'd been kidnapped out of a tent. What's your name? And she said, my name is Cleo. I just burst into tears on radio.
What would you have told that 15-year-old that was working for free on the weekend?
Wow, I've never thought about it. It's a really good question.
Today we're here with an Australian radio icon, the host of 2GB's top-rated breakfast show, and a Walkley Award-winning journalist and TV personality, Ben Fordham. Thank you for coming on.
Hey Sam, how are you, mate?
Yeah, going great.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I just saw how you run the operation. I'll tell you what, it's amazing to be in there.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy doing a live radio show that kicks off at 5:30 in the morning, and you never know what's going to happen. It's one of the great things about my job. I'm a bit ADD or a bit ADHD, unmedicated.
Yeah.
So this kind of helps me in some way because it's just the mystery of not knowing what's going to happen next.
And you're up at 3:15 a.m. for the
Yeah,
show?
I started, I think when I moved into the breakfast show, 2:59 a.m. was my first alarm, and then I became a bit more confident after a while, and I went, I'll push it back to 3:10.
Yeah.
And now it's at 3:15. So that gives me just enough time to get out of bed, not wake up the family, get in here, have a meeting with the team at about 4:15, where everyone's gone through the news that's happened overnight while we've all been sleeping, and then we come up with a plan of attack.
And then you go on air and you run from 5 till 9 a.m.?
5:30 till 9. So yeah, we kick off the show, and a lot of the time you know what's happening, and then there are other days when something will just come out of nowhere, and they're the best days when a surprise pops up. And sometimes it's the nicest news in the world, sometimes it's terrible news. Probably the nicest news I've had to share that's just come out of nowhere was when a little girl called Cleo was missing in Western Australia, and she'd been kidnapped out of a tent with a mum and dad there and disappeared for 18 days in the end. And the whole country was like, where is this little girl, Cleo? And every day we do an update. We'd say, okay, day 15, day 16. And then one morning on day 18, I was in the middle of an interview with someone about something else, and someone just walked into the studio and handed me a piece of paper, and it said, WA police statement on Cleo Smith. So I just wrapped up the interview and I said, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. And I said, we've now got a statement about Cleo Smith from WA Police. So I started reading it, and I didn't know when I started reading it where it was going to end because it didn't say at the top of it.
And you didn't have time to check it before.
I didn't have time to
one
pre-read
of those moments
it. No.
it just comes in.
So I started reading it, and you have that thing that develops in the pit of your stomach where you thought, oh God, am I about to say here that they've found her body? Because I think that's what everyone was expecting. And then it got to the part of the statement where they say they conducted a search warrant on a home. They went in home and the home was empty. And then they went into a room and there was a little girl in the room. And the officer said, what's your name? And she said, my name is Cleo. And I just burst into tears on radio while it was happening because I've got little kids as well. And you just think, oh, there for the grace of God go I. Started bawling my eyes out, and I threw to the ad break, and then I came back out of the ad break. I kind of composed myself, and then I started crying again. And then listeners started calling in saying, no, mate, don't worry about it. We're all crying. Because it was like, how can you pull off a miracle like that after 18 days where everyone had pretty much expected it's not going to end well?
Nearly 3 weeks.
Yeah, when something like that happens, Sam, they say, if you don't find them within the first 24 hours,
Is that right?
yeah, I mean, the first 24 hours are crucial. Not to say you won't find them.
Mm.
And there have been people who've been found 35 years after being taken from their family. So it does happen, but the odds are stacked against you. So I love that part of the job in radio, that it's the mystery of what might happen.
Then you got something like today where the trains are off and you had Chris Minns in. And
Yeah. Today it was the Premier coming in, Chris Minns, and all of the trains shat themselves, essentially, excuse the French. So the trains weren't working. He came in and he announced on air, okay, there'll be a fare free day for the people of New South Wales on the following Monday. And so you kind of get things like that evolve on the show. They're announced fresh, and And often people are waking up in the morning and they want to know what's going on. They have an appetite for news. I think as the day goes on, I think that appetite can kind of wane a little bit. Certainly when I was on the drive time show, which was 3 till 6 in the afternoon, I would be acutely aware of that. The fact that people have heard what happened this morning. They've heard what's going on in politics. They know about this and that. And maybe they're looking for a little bit of light relief in the afternoon. So I would cover the hard topics, but I'd also just be looking for some of the lighter things and things that others hadn't covered to get you through. But in the morning, people wake up and they just want to know what's the hell's going on. Yeah. And it's my job to let them know.
Does that put more pressure on the morning show? Like I heard when you were first offered the morning show, you said no.
I didn't want to do it at first. Yeah. That's not the reason I said no to it at first. It's just that I was following in a host, Alan Jones, who'd done it successfully for so long. He'd been number one for so long. So I was just trying to protect myself a little bit.
Nervous?
Yeah, nervous and self-preservation, where you think, all right, am I going to be hurt here? And I don't want to be hurt. So it might be easier for someone else to go and do that job. And so I just said to the bosses, get someone else to do it. And I don't want to do it. And after many conversations, I discovered that a lot of the people who I trust thought it was a good idea for me to do it.
Your advisors?
Yeah, well, not advisors, but like my wife, my mum, my brother, my sister, Tom Malone, my boss, who's also a lifelong friend.
Yeah.
And then I started ringing a few other people as well and saying, what do you think of this? They went, it's great. And I said, well, I think it's bad. I think it's a dumb idea. I think it'd be better from my point of view to stay doing what I'm doing, which I really liked, and let someone else go in there. I mean, someone else can walk the plank and discover.
You thought it might have been too risky.
Yeah.
To take that job, take the risk.
But what I learned through that, Sam, was that sometimes, even though my life has been dictated by my own instinct, what's to say that the instincts of others might not be more powerful than mine? And on that one, I was wrong. This was the right call for me to step into this job. And the things that I was worried about, they've now disappeared. I've kept the audience that was there when I took over.
I heard the ratings went up.
They've gone up. Ratings go up and ratings go down, so what goes up must come down, and hopefully in ratings terms in radio, what goes down must also come up. So they go up and they go down, but they've certainly been strong. But what I learned through that was that don't always think that you are the fountain of knowledge, because I've had great success in my life by trusting my instinct. So I'm very reluctant not to listen to my own voice in my own head. But through that experience 4 or 5 years ago, I've learned, well, sometimes you can be too close to something and you are better off relying on the instinct of people around you who you clearly respect and love. And if 5 of them are telling you it's a good idea and one voice in your head is telling you it's a bad idea, maybe you should listen to the others.
Bit clarity from the outside.
Yeah, so that's what I've learned through that a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I still trust my own instincts, Sam, more than anyone else's. Because it served me well for a long time. And I'm a big believer in that gut feeling that you get.
I couldn't agree more.
I'm sure you would have had it when competing.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what the butterflies in the stomach would have been doing.
Nerves, yeah.
And you're walking out on a diving board and looking down and the world watching you and the TV cameras and the flashes of the stills and all those other things. I mean, the gut, I'm sure, would be churning at a time like that.
Yeah, certainly. In fact, you wake up the morning of a competition and sometimes you honestly ask yourself, why do I do this? Because you feel so nervous for that moment. But then you just push through that. You go out there. At the end of the day, especially when it goes well, you're like, I'm really glad that I stuck to my guns even when I wasn't so sure and I was so nervous.
Yeah. Well, you know what? After that experience, after getting through the transition of taking over the breakfast show and the ratings held and then they started going up and then they were just really, really strong. I was leaving 2GB one day and I was in the car driving out of the car park and I thought I should ring the people who told me to do it. So one of them was Tom Malone, my boss. I called him and I said, quite arrogantly, I said, mate, you're not as dumb as I thought you were. He goes, what do you mean? And I said, mate, you made the right call for me to do breakfast. I said, it was the right call. The show's going really well. I think I'm sounding pretty good. I think the listeners really like it. So, mate, it turns out you were right. And he goes, mate, don't act so surprised. But I thought, well, I've just become accustomed to listening to myself above all others. So hopefully that will steer me a little bit in the future where I still listen to my instinct, but I'm someone who's got the ears to listen to the instinct of others too.
Sometimes you need someone like that. Like my first diving coach for Ninka, like I wasn't sure whether I could make it because I came in really late to the institute. And when you have someone else that believes in you,
Yeah.
sometimes more than yourself, it takes you to somewhere you never thought you'd be able to go.
I think also we rely on each other. I certainly do. I've got a tight-knit group of mates. There are a few of us, and what we do is sometimes it's pulling you back from the edge when you're about to do something stupid. So I can't think of
Have
the
you had a
number of
moment like
times-
that?
Yeah, you have.
Tell us now, have you?
Oh yeah, definitely. It usually goes something like this. It usually goes me ringing someone, a mate whose opinion I trust, and I say, "Have you got a minute? I just want to bring you in the loop on something I'm about to do." And then I tell them something's happened, something's gone wrong, and I'm really disappointed in this particular person. And I'm sending them this message. And then I read the message to the person who's having a listen to my gripe.
I think we can all relate to this.
And they say, don't send that. Do not send that message. Because in the heat of the moment, you think it's going to make you feel better. And it probably does for a short period of time. Mind you, then the anxiety kicks in when you've sent the message and you're like, have they seen it? Are they going to respond? Are they going to come back
It's like a risky text
with
to
double
a girl.
barrels? Or are they going to, yeah, it's like it's shooting a shot, right?
Yeah.
And so I've actually got a reciprocal arrangement with one of my mates. He now rings me and he goes, all right, it's my turn. This is what I'm about to send. And sometimes it can be softening the language where Tommy Malone, who I mentioned before, sometimes I've said to him, look, I'm about to send an email and this is what it says. And he says, look, mate, it sounds a bit emotional. I just pull some of the emotion out. I'd lose that word and that word and that word just to make it a bit more reasonable. So I certainly lean on other people. And sometimes it's not, should I do this or what should I do? It's I'm about to do this. But you know deep down that it's a risky play. And sometimes, thankfully, the person like Tommy will go, absolutely, press send. But on other times they go, mate, do not send that message. So I'm glad I've got people around me who I trust who give me advice like that.
What about in the radio where you've got to keep relations to keep people coming on the show, but also hold people like politicians accountable?
Yeah.
How do you hold someone accountable without completely burning a bridge?
Well, the good ones understand that you're just doing your job.
Okay.
And most of the people who are household names in Australia, they get it because they didn't become household names by having a glass jaw. So I can think of an example, for example, Bill Shorten. At one stage during COVID, someone dobbed in Bill Shorten for being on a plane and flying from Perth to Sydney while he had a cough and he wasn't wearing a mask, right? And they took a photo of him and they sent it to us. And anyway, we did it on air. I didn't kind of hound him or whatever because I hated wearing masks too. But my listener was saying, hang on, we're in the middle of a pandemic. He's got a cough. He's coughing the whole time. He doesn't have a mask on. Bill said, no, I only took it off when I was eating or drinking, yeah. But I did that. Then sometime later, I knew that Bill was really angry about it, right? Because it caused him some discomfort. I remember about 9 months later, I called Bill about something and I thought he won't pick up. And he goes, g'day, Ben. I said, oh, g'day, Bill. How are you? He goes, yeah, I'm not too bad, mate. What's happening? And I said, I thought you wouldn't be talking to me still over the mask thing. He said, oh, mate, life's too short for that. And that just sums things up, I mean, I've had arguments with Liberal premiers, Labor prime ministers. Albo's another one. I've had some ding-dong battles with Albo. Had him in the studio at one stage and he falsely accused me of doing something, Sam. And so I was like, excuse me, Prime Minister, excuse me. And I remember a few days afterwards, I walked past this police officer outside a bakery and he just looked at me and he goes, excuse me, Prime Minister. And I said, oh, mate, what? And he goes, I saw it on TikTok. Yeah. Okay, so
your TikTok stuff does good.
Yeah, we go all right on TikTok. That was young Spiro Christopoulos, who's been a guest on your podcast,
a legend,
who said very early on we need to get on TikTok. And again, if there are younger people around who are smarter than me, you go, right, let's do it. And now some of our videos on there will get 1 million views.
Yep. I see them. I see them come up.
Yeah, but then again, like on Albo's thing, we had a blue over that. That was to do to the Voice to Parliament. I could see it was going to fail. I was trying to warn him it was going to fail. He didn't listen to me. And that was a period where I felt like, okay, well, we're probably a bit cold at the moment in our relationship. But he's not silly. He understands I've got a job to do. He's got a job to do. He got over it. I got over it. I mean, I tend not to bear a grudge or carry around a chip on my shoulder. I don't think I've got the attention span for it. I'm like, I've moved on.
I feel similar to that.
Yeah.
Because social media is quite fast paced and people come at you left, right, and center as well. And
I've seen that with you a little bit. You've had a few skirmishes.
Yeah, that's
haven't
all
you?
part of the fun.
Abby Chatfield.
I'm just having a crack.
You and Abby. Hello, Abby.
I didn't
know
ask for
Abby's
that, by
always
the way.
watching the podcast.
I don't pick these fights, but
No.
sometimes you got to respond.
But also, it's interesting when you then bump into the people when you're out and about.
Well, I met her a couple of weeks before.
Yeah.
Thought she was lovely.
Yeah. And, you know, the truth is, Sam, you are going to bump into her again. And even though she's now taken a pot shot at you over whatever the election or politics or whatever, the true test of Sam is how you respond the next time you see her after she's sledged you online, because chances are you'll walk up and go, "Hi, Abby."
That'll be nice.
And then that often throws them too, where they go, "Oh, I wasn't expecting this friendly approach." You go, "Well," I just say to people, "Look, I don't have the attention span to carry around a grudge."
I couldn't agree more with that.
We move on. You know, you have a disagreement about things and then everyone moves on. And I like having people in my orbit who don't think the same way as me. I mean, you should see some of the conversations between myself and my wife, Jodie. You know, like I'll say, "Oh, this is wrong," and A, B, C, and she'll go, "But have you thought of X, Y, Z?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I don't care about X, Y, Z. But what about, okay, you know, so, but I like that. I like that challenge of ideas.
You like a bit of confrontation.
Yeah, I
push and
mean,
shove of the
I
ideas.
like sitting around a dinner table or a coffee table or a pub or whatever and having a difference of opinion. You know, I worked with a cameraman for many years, Drew, and the sound recordist and the producer confessed to us after a while. They said, well, we went to dinner one night in New Zealand. We were there filming a story, and then apparently they were so accustomed to myself and Drew getting into a debate about something that after an hour they went, "Well, this is a bit boring." And then one of them went, "How come you guys haven't had an argument tonight?" And I went, "Who?" They said, "You and Drew." And I said, "Drew, do we argue?" He goes, "I don't know." And I said, "All right, well, what do you want to argue about?" And then he goes, "What do you think about Chappelle Corby?" And I said, "I think she's a drug smuggler." He goes, "Right, let's go." So then we started having a debate and the others went, "Oh, this is more like it. This is what we like." So I love a debate. One of my great regrets was not doing debating when I was at school.
Really?
My son, Freddie, is doing debating. He's in year 5 and he's doing debating. And I picked him up last Friday afternoon and I'm really, really happy when he's doing it. I say, you don't have to do it forever, but at least give it a go, because it's one of my regrets that I didn't do it.
What about you as a kid? If I wanted to see how Ben Fordham became the man he is today, what part of your childhood would you point to?
I reckon mum and dad. I think that I grew up in a household where mum and dad had an office that was based in our house. So there were 2 phone lines. So one you'd pick up and go, "Hello, Ben speaking." The other you would go, "Hello, this is the Fordham Company, Ben speaking." And there was a different level of professionalism required when picking up that phone. So mum and dad were small business owners who were battlers. Their first office was our garage. So one day there was a garage there. The next day I said, "Where's the garage gone?" And they went, "The garage is gone." You know, so the roller door disappeared and bricks went in its place, and that was the office. So I watched that develop and the business became bigger and more successful. My brother Nick now runs the Fordham Company. But I think being in a home when mum and dad were having conversations that were adult conversations on the phone, and the nature of their business was that they started a management business where they manage athletes, media personalities, famous people, content creators, whatever they might be. So dad was often negotiating over the phone. And I'd listen in on those negotiations. Sometimes the negotiations would happen around our dining room table. Ricky Stewart's first ever rugby league contract with the Canberra Raiders was done on our dining room table. And I heard the way Dad handled that. The Raiders came and tabled an offer. Ricky was earning nothing playing rugby union. These guys turned up and offered him serious cash to play rugby league. And Ricky had said to Dad before that meeting, "Whatever they offer, just say yes." Dad said, "Mate, just leave me to do the negotiations, please," because Ricky was a friend of our family. And when they first handed the offer over, I don't know what was written on the piece of paper because we were hiding upstairs, listening through the cracks in the stairs. But Dad looked at it and said, "Well, I don't want to spoil a good bottle of red wine, so let's park that because that's not going to work. let's just enjoy the wine and have a chat, because clearly we're not here to do a deal. And the guy from the Canberra Raiders was like, oh, I don't understand. He said, mate, there's no way in the world that figure is going to get a deal with Ricky when there's so much interest in him. The guy then went out in the backyard and made a phone call and then came back with a revised offer. And I was like, oh, I see. So you can't help but learn from listening to those things. Dad wasn't ripping up the piece of paper over the dining room table. He wasn't banging the desk or screaming or shouting. He just said, oh, let's enjoy the bottle of red. It's a really nice, he started talking about the bottle of red wine. He said, this is a really nice bottle of red. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Let's forget about that because that's not happening. And of course, people then go, oh, hang on a minute. So I learned a lot through that, and also a combination of my mum and my dad, because my dad's probably more the let's do the deal kind of guy. My mum's more the how's this deal going to work kind of woman. So,
sounds like a good team.
Oh, really good combination. And I said to my little brother, Nick, when he joined the business, make sure you're learning from mum just as much as you're learning from dad, because they've both got qualities that the other don't have. So that would be the biggest thing that shaped my life, just listening in while growing up. And a lot of the people they looked after and they were around worked in radio. My dad was involved, as my mum was, in giving Alan Jones an opportunity to audition to do a radio show, because Radio 2UE was looking for someone. My dad was involved in rugby union. Alan Jones was the Wallabies coach. So someone said, what would Alan Jones be like? And Dad said he'd be brilliant. So they took him into a studio, put him in front of a microphone and auditioned. He became one of the most successful radio presenters in Australia's history. So I suppose I was lucky that I was near that stuff. And I just thought, I really like radio. So I started hanging around radio stations, and I did my first week of work experience at 15.
How'd you get into radio at 15?
That work experience. I did 1 week of work experience on
How'd you get that job?
Alan's show.
Yeah.
Well, it was like, because Mum and Dad had helped Alan do his initial audition, I wrote a letter, because Mum, and that's the other thing, they were never the type of parents who would do anything for you. They would do lots of things for us, but when it came time for you to stand on your own 2 feet, you had to make it happen yourself. So I wrote a letter to Alan that they would have checked over and, all right, okay, send it off. And he said, sure, come in. So I did a week of work experience at 15. And then during that week, I discovered that they were looking for someone on weekends in the sports department. So I said, I'll do it for free. So that was an offer too good to refuse. And I did it for free to begin with. And then in the end, they said, we're going to have to start paying you. And so they paid me every Sunday, $60, I think, every Sunday to go in there. And I'd make coffees and buy lunches, answer phones, and just start to learn.
So look around this office now and see all the radio awards and the journalistic awards. What would you have told that 15-year-old that was working for free on the weekend?
Wow. I've never thought about it. It's a really good question. I think I'd probably say you don't need any advice from me. Knowing now where I was headed, I'd probably just say, if you hear those things of what would you say to the 15-year-old you? If I could whisper in the 15-year-old me's head, I'd probably just say, mate, just keep doing what you're doing. Because whatever I was doing at that stage was putting me on the right path. And we all make sacrifices, Sam. You certainly have through your career. My sacrifices at the age of 16, 17, 18 were missing out on lots of piss-ups. So I went to lots of them. As far as 18th birthday parties, I prioritised being at 18th and 21st. But there were times when I just had to say, oh, no, I can't go to that. And my mates would be like, what do you mean? You've got to. At Sam's party, I'm like, I'm reading the news. I'm doing the midnight to dawn shift on 2UE, reading the 3 a.m. news that 14 people are listening to. But, when you do things like that, there are always good people out there who help you along the way as well. And on one of those mornings when I was reading the 3 a.m. news.
Looks like you got that microphone over there, actually. Is that the microphone?
That was one of my early microphones I would have used being on the road.
Okay.
Putting it under people's noses. I used to stick that microphone under John Howard's mouth when he was the Prime Minister as a young radio reporter. But when I read the news, one morning I got out of the booth after the 3 a.m. news and the phone rang. And the phone usually does not ring at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was Peter Overton from Channel 9,
wow,
who's now the face of 9 News. But at the time, he was a up-and-coming newsreader. I think he was reading the Today Show news on a Saturday morning. So off Broadway compared to what he's doing now, prime time. He hadn't been on 60 Minutes at that stage or anything like that. And Pete called and he said, Ben, Peter Overton. I said, oh, hi, Pete. How are you? He goes, boy, that was a good bulletin at 3 a.m. That was a really good one, mate. I like how you did that. And I like how you did that. And, yeah, I've never forgotten that, that Pete was looking out for me at 3:05 on a Saturday morning when you think no one's listening, and little bits of encouragement like that just give you a little bit of fuel to keep on going.
Go a long way. Is because he, of course, works at Channel 9 as well, and Channel 9 owns 2GB. Have you guys been like good friends nearly throughout your whole career then?
It's funny. When I've reminded Pete of that, I've said, mate, I never forgot that phone call. And he said, well, I've got a confession to make. I said, yeah. And he goes, guess who made a similar call like that to me when I was young? I said, who? And he said, your dad did. Your dad was at the time was calling the rugby on 2UE. And he said, I was a young 2UE radio reporter in the sports department, I think he was. And he said, the first few times I went on air, I sounded terrible, but your dad called and said, Pete, well done, mate. You're sounding good. Keep on going. So it's funny the way the world works that my dad was there encouraging Pete. Pete's been encouraging me. And I've now watched the next generation because Pete's got a daughter who goes to school with my niece. And there was an issue early on when my niece was adjusting to a new school and she didn't know anyone when she first started. And I thought, oh, I know someone who goes to that school, Allegra Overton. So I called Jessica Overton, or Jessica Rowe, and I said, this is going to sound really weird, but can I have a talk to your daughter? Because I just want to, there's something that, and I just said to her, look, my niece is starting at the same school. Can you look out for her? And the next day I found out that Allegra walked around and said, where's Maisie Fordham? My niece. And Maisie's in the younger years, Allegra's in the older years, and all the younger girls look up to people like Allegra. And so it's funny the way the world works that, we've been friends for a long time.
It's kind of what goes around really comes around.
Absolutely.
And with the media industry, some of the changes so fast. How do you stay relevant? How have you been able to stay relevant and on top of the media for so long
I think by surrounding myself with younger people.
Because you also have one of the youngest teams in radio on top of that.
Yeah. I think we've worked out at various stages what the average age is. It's scary how young it is. They're all early 20s or some later 20s, but the average age is early 20s. And I look back, I mentioned Spiro before saying we should be on TikTok. All right. And I say, tell me why. And he shows it to me and explains why we should. All right, go for it. So you've got to trust people who have got their own instinct and they're younger than me. And therefore, as the landscape changes, you've got to be listening to them. I had James Willis, a relatively young guy compared to me, who said to me a few years ago, I want to change our podcasting strategy. And I said, why? And he explained it to me. I kind of understood it. And I just said, all right, do it. Starting when? I said, starting tomorrow. He goes, which parts of the changes I've recommended? I said, all of them. Let's just go with it. Within a month, our podcast went from being a reasonably well-rating podcast as part of the Nine Entertainment Company to being the number one podcast within the Nine Entertainment Company. That's including sport, news, everything. The number one podcast is Ben Fordham Live. And that happened within a month. Now, if I was stubborn or thought, oh, James doesn't know what he's talking about, well, I wouldn't have been able to achieve that. But I just thought, well, he knows more than me. So let's give it a go. And the worst thing you can do is fail. And if you fail, you can do something about that. So you've just got to listen to people and look at some of those emerging trends.
And you can keeping those young people around help you stay on
I think
top
that
of
helps.
what's happening. Because the social media move was great.
Yeah, and I think, like we've had people who've started working for us at the age of 14, and that might sound strange to some people, but Lucy Borg, who works with us, Lucy came in at 14 years of age. It's almost too young, but we sensed something on the phone while talking to her that she was a bit of a wise young woman. So she came in and she started doing the phones where you're fielding calls from members of the public. You're trying to work out which calls are worth putting to the air. It's pretty full on.
I just saw a little bit of it.
Oh, you've seen it
so
out there.
many calls.
And I liken it to air traffic control where you're like, hang on, I'm in the air traffic control tower. There's planes everywhere and I've got to decide which ones are landing. And if you screw up, there's a crash. So it's a very important job. And she was so confident on those phones, on work experience. And I said to her afterwards, I said, oh, look, I'm told that you're a gun on the phones. Where does the confidence come from? Oh, I don't know. She goes, I do Macca's drive-through. And she goes, if you do Friday night Macca's drive-through when everyone's been out on the sauce, you've got to be able to talk to everyone. And I went, wow, isn't it funny? And I found kids who do retail are more confident.
Just know how to deal with people.
I reckon. I've dealt with a few families where I've said to their children have come in for work experience and they're good, but they could do with a bit more confidence. And so I've said to them, look, I don't know whether this works, but based on my experience, kids who work in retail, whether it's Macca's or Gloria Jeans or whatever it might be at a petrol station or anywhere else, they have a bit more confidence after dealing with the public face to face. So yeah, we've got some really young people around. And I've also found you can't say no to someone based on their age. You know, the executive producer of our show, Liam Maguire, was young to be asked to be executive producer. And the bosses did say to me at one stage, is he too young? And we've got another star producer working with us, Sienna Williams. I think Sienna was 17 when she first came in. And again, when you say to the boss, we're going to employ this person, they'll say, are you sure? You don't want someone who's a bit more experienced, but I like people who've got that young energy and you can teach them the way you want things to be done as opposed to the way they do it.
More malleable.
Yeah, I think that helps. And, you know, Sienna came along just because I was watching her play rugby league. She was a star rugby league player and she was ruthless on the footy field. And I was watching and I said, oh my God, you know, like when she would thump people or, you know, tackle people or cut them in half. And she's, you know, she's built like this. That's the irony of the whole thing. And she's the sweetest girl in the world. But I said something like, with respect to her parents who are on the sideline, she's an animal. And her mum said, yeah, she's pretty tough. And then her dad said, and she's smart too. And I said, oh yeah? What do you mean? He said, oh, she just got her HSC results. I said, oh yeah? Again, curiosity. Is this where the conversation's supposed to end? I went, no. What did she get? And they looked at each other and I said, yeah, tell me. You're proud parents, tell me. And they said, she got 99. Okay, so when the game finished, I said, Sienna, what are you doing next year? Oh, I'm studying psychology. Well, okay, we'll see about that. And she's been here ever since. Wow. Again, I said to her, would you be happy to come in at 4:00 on Monday morning and do some work experience? Unpaid. If they say yes to that, there's a sign. A good start. There's a sign.
Spiro Christopoulos, his story I find amazing. He just called you up.
He called.
Because he just wanted to work in radio. I thought that's like the pinnacle of just having a go.
He was an open line caller. Like he called on my first day of the breakfast show at 6:25 a.m. It was up on the board. It says Spiro 17. Because if someone's younger, they let me know, just so you know. If you're talking to a 5-year-old, it's different to talking to a 50-year-old. So it said Spiro 17. And I spoke to him. He goes, Ben, I just want to wish you the best of luck for your new show. I listened to you on the drive show. I've set the alarm early before school to listen to you. And he was really good talent, which means he was a really good talker. You know, we use that terminology. Are they good talent? Because you want to know, are they going to be able to string a sentence together? And I said, hang on to his number because we might need him again in the future. And then when rules came in around COVID, school formals.
We had some weird stuff going on. He was the school captain at my school.
He was the school captain. So it was, no dancing or no kissing or whatever. I went, get Spiro on. So I said, let's go to our HSC correspondent, Spiro Christopoulos. And the moment I knew that he was going to be a star is when he came on and I said, what do you think about the dancing ban and the kissing ban? He goes, Ben, can I firstly say how much we appreciate all of the hard work of Gladys Berejiklian and the Chief Health Officer of New South Wales, Dr. Kerry Chant. They've guided us through a very challenging time. Having said that, and then he launched into them about these, and I was like, oh my Lord, this guy could be the premier. Like at 17 to have the wherewithal to say, look, before I have a crack here, I'll just thank them for what they've done. I thought this kid is streets ahead of the rest. So then I said, get him in. And then one thing led to another. We bought him a beer one day. I think it was the day after his school formal. And then he was prepared to come and work over summer, midnight to dawn, graveyard shift. And yeah, it wasn't long before I was sitting there at the Radio Awards, and when Abby Chatfield, of all people, read out the winner, she said, and the winner is Spiro Christopoulos. And I was sitting next to him at those award nights. And that was only, I think, 2 years after that phone call came in on the open line. So things move quickly in radio. That's what I like about it. Yeah, you don't have to necessarily sit there for 10 or 12 years. It's a bit like sport. It's a bit like sport. Age is no barrier. It's like you can be a 27-year-old superstar champion, but if a 19-year-old comes along and he can run faster or she can swim faster, you're out, she's in.
Certainly. And with Spiro driving in this morning, I was listening to you on the radio. We heard Spiro as well. So it's nice to hear him.
Oh, yeah. He's
still on the radio.
He's
doing
there every day.
well.
And you know, we had a thing last year when I found out that I was going to be going to the Paris Olympics. And I said, I think Spiro should come as well. And management said, oh, okay, why do you think Spiro should come? And I said, because. And I laid down why I thought he should. When that was approved, I said, let's not tell Spiro. Let's break the news to him on air. So it was so cool to watch this kid who
I heard that.
encouraged. Yeah. And I just said to him, and by the way, we've got a surprise for you. And I just started playing some French music, some Edith Piaf. And I said, you're going to have to learn a new language. And Spiro was like, Greek? I said, no, mate, you can speak Greek. Listen to the music. He goes, Italian? I go, no, mate, this is French music. It's Edith Piaf. You're going to Paris for the Olympics. And, mate, to see the shock on his face. And then to be in Paris with him and riding around on share bikes around the Arc de Triomphe.
He would have liked
and
that.
Just, you know, FaceTiming his mum and dad and my family as well, saying we're in Paris together. And I'm really lucky that we came across Spiro.
He's a legend. And being in media and you speak so freely on air, how do you say what you want without getting in trouble with defamation or being sued?
I've been sued.
Have you?
Yeah.
Many times?
Yeah. No, not too many times. I've been pretty good.
And does that cover by Channel 9? Do they
Good
look after you
question.
guys?
Up until a certain point. So it used to be that we were covered completely. Now we've had to sign contracts that say we are covered up until a certain point. In other words, if we have taken the appropriate steps to do the right thing and say the right thing, then we're fine. But if we've been reckless in our coverage, if I've just decided to go on air one morning, completely off the cuff, and just say completely defamatory things about people who've done nothing wrong, Channel 9 would probably be able to argue that that's reckless behaviour on my part, had nothing to do with them. So yeah, they've taken steps in recent years to protect themselves in that regard, to say that's why we've got lawyers. So we've got lawyers on call 24/7. I could write something at 10 o'clock at night and say, I'm going to be saying this at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And they'll have lawyers. If there's no one asleep in it, if there's no one awake in Australia as a lawyer, they have a lawyer who will be awake overseas. So they're on call 24/7. I can send them a script. They'll look into it and they'll sometimes just change a few things. You know, we need a few more allegedlys in there.
Yeah.
Or they'll just say, look, I think that word's too heavy, you know, so you get some advice on that. I don't want to be sued. If I'm saying something about someone because I think that they are a bad person, the last thing I want to do is to give them a big fat check because they've been able to successfully sue me. But look, I've had a few skirmishes over the years, Sam. I had a story years ago when I was a reporter for a current affair. I conducted an investigation into a bloke who was trying to organise for a hitman to kill someone. And as part of that investigation, I posed as a hitman. I know I look like a threatening, menacing figure. But as part of that, I was charged by New South Wales Police. I was actually charged with...
Do you have a criminal record then?
No, I don't have a criminal record. Thank you very much. I don't.
Okay.
Mum, I promise you, I do not have a criminal record.
So charged is...
So what happened was I was charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Because what happened, the police felt that the moment I found out that someone was trying to organise something like this, I should have gone to them straight away. And I didn't go to them straight away. I went to them just before the story went to air, but I didn't go to them straight away. And also I recorded a conversation with this guy who was part of the conspiracy to kill someone. I recorded a conversation to prove that he was planning a hit on someone. And police also charged me with an illegal recording for that recording because the person didn't know they were being recorded. But they also charged the person who didn't know they were being recorded. They charged him with conspiracy to murder. So the person who I was doing the story on, they did get busted. They got charged with conspiracy to murder, thanks to the audio that I recorded. But I got busted over the way I recorded the audio, and I got busted for not going to police early enough. It led to a 2-year case in the Federal Court of Australia under Justice Elizabeth Fullerton. And I remember saying to my mum and dad at the time, I said, this will be a 2-year nightmare. It'll cost Channel 9 millions of dollars in legals, but we'll get a smack on the bum at the end of it and walk away with no conviction. And that's what happened. Because we're able to prove to the court that this was not something that we were doing because we were trying to be malicious or hurtful. We were trying to shine a light on something that was going on. The guy who came to us was never going to talk to police. He was involved in the underworld, right? So we were like, we felt at the time we were doing the right thing, but we got in trouble over it. And, you know, you have those things that happen along the way, and it was an experience.
Was that incredibly stressful, or the whole time did you feel protected?
Oh, when you're walking into a courtroom and the cameras are focused on you, when you're used to being one of the guys in the media pack, that's weird. Because it's like, hang on a minute, I'm one of you guys.
Yeah. Friendly fire.
Yeah, well, guys, it's Ben. What are you doing? Why are you following me with these cameras? But then you realize, hang on, we do this to people every day. So it's not like you can all of a sudden start going like that to the camera and saying, getting out of my face. Or it's not like you'd say to one of the other journos, hey, boys and girls, lay off, it's me. Yeah. It's a story. It's a Channel 9 reporter accused of being involved in a conspiracy over an alleged hit involving the underworld. Of course it's a story. Of course they're going to cover it. So, yeah, that was an experience for me. And I probably learned a thing or two from it. I'm sure Justice Fullerton would hope that I did learn a thing or two from it. But, you know, there's also that hunger to get a story. So you've got to try and balance things out a bit.
Imagine it's a fine line between doing something too
much. And again,
it
comes back to one of those original topics of instinct. My instinct told me that I was doing the right thing. The law tells me that I wasn't.
Okay.
So, all right, you know, I listen to my instinct more than I read the Crimes Act. There are lots of things in the Crimes Act that the average person wouldn't know. And on that one, I listen to my instinct and also my lawyers. My lawyers, Channel 9's lawyers, had given us the go-ahead to do the story. Mm-hmm. So I knew, well, hang on, this is not just me and the producer. There are smarter people than us who've said, yeah, you're right to go. But sometimes that desire to get the story on air will cloud the judgment of some people. You know, you got to watch that your judgment isn't being clouded because you want to tell the story.
Especially if you have something as big as a conspiracy of the murder.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And sometimes if the lawyers say, no, you're not running it, the boss will say, why not? Why not? We should be running this. And so sometimes the lawyer can be under a little bit of pressure because it's like, all right, I've got some TV executive who's been around longer than I have telling me he's done this a million times before. So they're those competing interests that you got to weigh up.
So you get things checked, and now these days you have the experience to look at a story and just know where to put allegedly.
Yeah, and also sometimes you don't have time to get them checked because they happen live on air. If someone walked in all of a sudden and handed me a piece of paper and it was involving something that related to the criminal justice system or charges or allegations or whatever, you've just got to do your best. So what I'll often say in these cases now is I'll say, of course, the accused is innocent until proven otherwise. So I always try and get that into anything to say, so because you can say all of these terrible things about Sam Fricker and all of these awful things that Sam Fricker's accused of doing, but then if you say, of course, Sam is innocent until proven otherwise, it gives you a little bit of coverage in court.
Bit of a safety net.
Yeah.
Now, being such a strong-minded person, you've got to have good views to go out for people to listen to. Has there been anything you've changed your mind on since you were young?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
What might those things be?
Things I've changed my mind on. I think I change them all the time. The most recent one would be relating to pill testing, I think.
drug testing.
Yeah,
at
drug
festivals?
testing at festivals and things like that. I was never a supporter of pill testing at festivals because I found it to be a bit contradictory that you go, oh, so what, you've got the sniffer dogs outside
Yeah.
and the cops have got the sniffer dogs outside and anyone with drugs can get busted, but then you can go inside and you've
Get
got
them all
immunity
tested.
inside some tent. And I was also of the view, having spent a bit of time at festivals myself growing up, Sam, I was like, really, is anyone really going to throw their drugs away? I mean, if you've purchased them, and let's face it, most people who've purchased drugs, they know that they are not made in a chemist by a registered pharmacist. You know that this is a lucky dip. And that's part of the reason why people take drugs, because they're like, all right, I want an escape from whatever my mind's doing to me at the moment. And this is going to be this lucky dip. I know it sounds crazy and reckless and whatever, but it's a reality of life when you're growing up. So I was never a fan of pill testing, but then the New South Wales government decided that they were going to trial pill testing in New South Wales. And I think what had happened was just a few months before, there were two young women from Melbourne who were poisoned accidentally in Laos with methanol. And that was not a drug that you take in the pill form. It was a drink.
Alcohol.
Yeah, at backpackers. But it occurred to me that the same rule applies. Holly and Bianca didn't know what was inside the drink, just like some kid may not know what's inside the pill. And if there was someone you could take the drink to beforehand and say, there's no methanol in this, is there? And they go, there is. Don't drink it. Well, I look at Holly and Bianca's mum and dad and my heart breaks for them. And maybe as my kids are starting to get older, one day they're going to be going to festivals or going backpacking and whatever. And I thought, if there was a chance for them to test something and change their mind and decide not to take it, I don't want to stand in the way of that option. And the other thing that changed me on it too is it was explained to me by one of the young volunteers who works for New South Wales Health inside one of these tents. They said, look, and we were sitting actually around this table because I said to them, look, I want to learn more about it. Sometimes I do these things off air where I go, I'm not a fan of this, but try and change my mind.
Open to it.
Yeah. And they said, mate, look, sometimes what happens is it's a kid who's being peer pressured into doing something and they're looking for an out. I said, explain that to me. They said, well, look, 7 friends go to a festival. One of them's bought some ecstasy pills or some MDMA or something like that 3 days before. And the message gets around, everyone knows that Ramon's got the gear, right? So you turn up, sorry, Ramon, who's part of the production crew here. Ramon does not have the gear, right? Ramon's got the gear. Everyone knows, okay, we're on, here we go. But there might be one person in that group or more than one who deep down do not want to take the drugs. And they don't really want to say, oh, I'm not doing it. They may not have the confidence for that. But the volunteer from New South Wales Health was telling me, but mate, they use the tent as an excuse to dump the drugs. So they'll go in there and they'll go, look, can you be sure about what's in there? They go, no, we can't. Is there a chance there could be something in here that, yeah, there is? And there's been some bad batches going around recently on that. And they'll then walk out and go, I'm out. And I'm like, well, if that's going to make it easier for them, and hopefully this is something that my kids never have to confront, but I'm not an idiot. Of course they're going to confront these things. If that's going to make it easier for them to go, hey guys, you guys go for your life, but I've just been told something in there that's got me worried about it. So I've dumped it, or there it is, I'll give it back to you. You know what I mean? It's not for me. Well, my eyes have been open to that a little bit.
Yeah, as an elite athlete, I've never been interested in that at all, but it's also a good, we get drug tested really often. And I think if you do have the confidence to stand up and say, no, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
To just steer clear of.
And look, I know there are some kids who've got that confidence from the beginning and you actually see more of them now than when I was growing up.
It's great to see people that can stand up.
Where they just say, no, that's not my thing and it's
Yeah.
never been my thing. I'm not interested in it, but they still know how to go out and have a good time. That's fantastic. But yeah, I think you've got to be open-minded about things and realise that your mind is going to change. I mean, if your mind doesn't, it goes stale.
Yep. Got to be open-minded.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're into your real estate. Was
Yes.
that something that you
How do you know that?
always play? I've just heard it over the years,
Okay.
possibly from Spiro.
Yeah.
I know you love your real estate. Was that part of your long-term plan from the beginning of media, or was it something you fell in later in life?
How did I get into real estate? I'd say it was again through mum and dad. What happened was when we were young, we would sometimes drive over to this random unit and have to clean it. And you know, when you're a kid, you
The
don't ask.
Airbnb crew.
Yeah, you know, you don't ask questions. You're just
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
We're
what
going
doing.
over there and we'd clean it up and you know, someone to do the backyard, someone to do the front yard, and you'd be scrubbing things down. You'd spend half a day in this random unit cleaning it. And then I remember at one stage, I might have been 7 or 8, I said, why are we doing this? Like, why do we come here every 6 months and clean up this unit? And then Mum and Dad explained to me that this was a investment property that they owned. How does that work? Oh, well, instead of, you know, leaving money in the bank or spending money, we decided to invest some of that money in a small unit. And this gives a home for someone else to live in, but they pay us rent. So the moment that was explained to me, I thought, well, this sounds smart. So I bought my first unit when I was 19.
Wow.
For $139,000. And to the younger people who are listening right now, I apologise. I'm so sorry. I know that this is painful to listen to.
It's like a deposit these days.
It was a different world. I needed $15,000 for the deposit.
Yeah, wow.
That's it. And I went to my mate, Matt Hayson, who runs a real estate agent in Balmain in Sydney, Cobden and Hayson. I literally handed him the 15 grand. I said, there's the money. I showed it. It was in my account. There's 15 grand. I've saved it at 19. You buy it. He goes, well, what do you want? I said, no, that's up to you. You're the real estate guy. You find it, you buy it. So he said, I found this studio apartment in Potts Point. So bought it. I've still got it today.
Wow.
A couple of producers who've worked with me have been able to live in there at a reduced rent, Sam. I'll let you know.
So that's a good, good
I
asset to have for the allies.
Yeah, use it as a, hey, if you need somewhere to live, it's free, and I'll knock $100 off the rent.
Yeah. But think about that when my salary comes in.
Yeah. And I've always thought that one day one of my kids will live there, or maybe more than one. And you know, I don't want to out myself as a property hoarder because I know that that's not a popular thing in 2025. But the reality is I saw this as my way of building wealth. So I started buying more.
And diversify from the media industry.
Yeah. And then I've ended up becoming a bit of a property developer away from radio.
That's what my dad does.
All right.
Do you build yourself or you outsource
everything?
Yeah,
we build.
Yeah.
When I say we, it's, you know, I don't do any of the building. But what happened is years and years after buying that first one, I was actually living in Redfern, and my next door neighbour was a builder. And then he was in the coffee line one morning, and talk about, you know, life-changing moments. All I saw was him on a phone, and then he got off the phone, and when he hung up, his shoulders slumped. And I'm standing 2 people behind him, and I just saw those shoulders slump. So I was like, So then he saw me after he put in his order, and while I was waiting for mine, I said, making conversation, I said, did you get a bit of bad news on the phone? I was just showing off my body language skills. And he goes, yeah. And I said, what happened? Oh, you don't want to know, mate. And I said, try me. Anyway, cut a long story short, he was about to miss out on buying a property that he wanted to develop. And I said, why are you missing out? He goes, because I don't have the money until my other job finishes in April. And it was like 2 days before Christmas. I said, how much do you need? And then he said, it's about $75,000. And I was like, well, I'll be able to help you. I've got $100,000 in the bank. I'll loan it to you. No, I'm not borrowing money off my next door neighbour. I said, mate, so I don't know what I was thinking, but I went, let's drive up to the real estate agent, and we just put in an offer. I said, Turner Street, we're putting in an offer. And a lady had passed away, and the guy said, well, I'm going to have to ring the 3 children of the deceased. I said, sure. 20 minutes later, he came out and said, congratulations. And I went, oh. So that night, Steve came over to my house, and he said, mate, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Lillian, his wife, is really angry at me for doing it, like, because I told you she would not be happy about borrowing money from our next door neighbour. She thinks we should offer you 50% of the deal if you'd like it. And I said, mate, I'd love that. So we then started a business together, named after our street that we lived in. So we just named it after that. We were like, we both live in whatever street, so let's call it that. And then from that, we've done 3 or 4 of them of, you know, buying another block of land, you know, saving, developing it, creating more apartments. And at the moment, we're trying to get an affordable housing project off the ground with, hopefully, which we're working on at the moment. We bought a motel in Strathfield, in Sydney, and that's actually a motel that looks after a lot of women fleeing domestic violence. So we have a lot of women who turn up on our doorstep who the Department of Families and Communities send to us because the women's shelters are full, or they might have a child with them as well, and so we accommodate them.
It's nice you can house them and
give
them somewhere safe.
And we look after them, and then that gave us an idea that we bought another little block that's got that's nearby, that's got 2-bedroom units, that's more suitable to a mum with a child who's fleeing domestic violence, so they're not living in a motel. I found out at one stage we had a mum and a daughter living in our motel for 3 months. The daughter is the school captain of the local primary school in year 6, and none of the kids at school would ever know that she's living in the local motel. And that just breaks your heart. So we're now on a bit of a mission. We're trying to convince the New South Wales government to team up with us at the moment on this site, because they have a Department of Housing block next door to us. So we've said, look, why don't we do something together here that accommodates these poor women who are fleeing these situations, and also to build some affordable housing for people in Sydney who can't afford anything. Because I've kind of reached an age now where I've said to my business partners as well, who are good people, I said, look, we need to be part of the solution here, not part of the problem. It's great that we've got this land, but let's try and build something special here. Mind you, that'll only happen if people in government come on board as well, because as I've discovered, going to them with a blank canvas and saying, what would you like to do? Sometimes they end up scratching their heads for way too long. It's hard to get stuff moving.
You bring a plan to them and get them to sign off on it?
That's the thing. Okay. If I just decided, I don't want to take a plan to them. They should know what they need in the affordable housing space and the social housing space and emergency housing. And so we went to them and said, blank canvas, if you had our land as well as yours, what would you do with it? So that's where we're at the moment, trying to get them to dream something up, as opposed to, I don't want us as a developer going to them and they, this is a property developer trying to make money. If we're only interested in money, we wouldn't be talking to them. We wouldn't be worried about affordable housing or social housing. We'd just go, no, we'll just build stuff for top-end buyers who want to come and cut us a check. And don't get me wrong, there are other projects we're involved in, and that is exactly what we're wanting to do on those ones. But yeah, I want to be part of the solution in some way, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. But I really worry about kids who are starting out. I used to say to my producers, when they'd get a pay rise, now listen, what are you doing with this money? And have you thought about investing? Have you thought about cracking into the property market?
Where are those opportunities today?
Well, I've stopped saying that, Sam.
Yeah, wow.
Because it is totally unrealistic for me to be saying that to people in 2025. It's like, come on, save for a deposit. So what I now say to them...
What about land like further out where Sydney's growing?
Oh, no, there's opportunities. There's definitely opportunities. You should be buying the smallest, shittiest little property you possibly can that's in the back blocks of who knows where, just to get in. And I suppose where I now try and help with some of my producers who are all really young is I have made the comment to them before to go, look, if you're close to getting something and you're just falling short, then I'm more than happy to come in and help out financially. Really nice, I don't want you to miss out on something because you're a few grand short. So if you like something and it adds up, then bring me in the loop on it. A few of them have played with that and we've got close and it hasn't worked out, but I just let them know that option's on the table if you fall short. And the other thing I do is have a bit of a reward for people who do manage to get in, which is either a beautiful bottle of red wine or a beautiful box of champagne for your housewarming gift or whatever, to give them some encouragement. But I'm no longer saying to people, come on, what are you doing? Are you going to invest?
So expensive.
Because it's just so expensive. If I can help them in some way, I will. But I really feel for people today who are starting out, because it's not like it was when I started.
And finally, Ben, how would you like to be remembered in 10 years for your media career, or even longer? You've built such a strong personal brand. What would you like people to look back and say about Ben Fordham on 2GB?
Look, I'm going to plead the fifth on that one and just say that, like politicians say, and I've seen you interviewing some politicians where they say, I'll leave the commentary to the commentators.
Yeah. Well, I can't answer that one at the moment.
Look, Sam, I don't think that I'm going to be going down in the history books as one of the most recognised or awarded or memorable radio hosts in Australian history. I just don't think so. I think that radio is really defined by the pioneers in the industry. I think John Laws will probably be remembered as the most famous radio host in Australian history. That's on the AM dial and the talk side of things where I am. I think those people who start out and build something well before I've come along, I suppose I still look at those guys. John Laws is a mate of mine. In fact, he's coming into the radio studio in the next few weeks to have a chat with us because he's now retired. I have a lunch with Lawsy twice a year, and I love that. If anything, I hope that I've entertained a few people along the way. I hope that I've helped a few people along the way. We really put a lot of focus into that. We like solving problems. We're in the business of solving problems. And that means if you've got an issue, maybe someone's stolen your car, maybe you've lost
scammed.
Your dog, maybe you've been scammed, maybe the NDIS has cut your funding, maybe you've just had something happen to you that's really terrible. We like to be able to help. I remember a guy who called in once and the worst thing in the world happened to him. He was an old man and he was carrying about $6,000 after close one day, a small business owner, and he was carrying it from the business to the car. And for whatever reason, he dropped the bag in the car park after working a long day and a long week. And they went back and saw it on the CCTV. They could see the moment it dropped. But after that, they couldn't work out on the angles what had happened to it. Our listeners, when we told them about it, a guy just called in and went, mate, that's terrible. Just in case he doesn't find the money, I want to chip in $1,000. And then someone else called and went, I'll do 500. Someone else, 200. In the end, I think $12,000 was raised. And the guy had to then go, all right, well, I'll give the extra $5,000 to charity. So we've got some really generous listeners and we love nothing more than having someone turn up with an issue. It doesn't matter how big it is or how small it is. There was a kid recently called Hugo who was told he couldn't run cross country because he's short-statured. And I was like, what? In this age of inclusivity where we tell everyone they can do anything, you're going to tell this champion, short-statured cross-country runner he's not allowed to compete at the championships? We'll see about that. So we created a campaign called Let Hugo Run. And I'm very happy to say.
I bet that turned around pretty quick.
Oh, and I said to the authorities, I said, look.
They probably invited you to run too.
Yeah, I said, I'm telling you, by the time this is over, and, we organised for Ned Brockman, the champion runner who ran from one side of Australia to the other.
Yep.
When he did the big championship run where he ran around the
Olympic Park.
The track at Olympic Park, we arranged for Hugo to go out and run a few laps with him.
Yeah.
So by the end of it, Athletics Australia and School Sports Australia are like, oh, stuff it, just let Hugo run. So if you've got a problem, come and see us.
Good on you. And I've seen the way you look after your team. I know Spiro very well, and you even helped him out with a problem recently. So you do incredible work, and I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on.
I also, mate, I put them under a bit of pressure too. They're expected to perform. But, mate, congratulations on everything you've done. And you pivot as well.
Thank you.
When are you running for politics? When are you going to be putting your hand up? Should we save that for another podcast?
I want to dive well, and I want to make.
Listen to him. Listen to him dodging the questions. He's an expert at this. Coming to a polling booth near you, Sam Fricker.
Thank you.